Have you noticed how some people walk into a room and seem to light it up, while others, perhaps yourself, feel the light dim the moment the crowd surrounds them? It is a curious paradox. The same gathering, the same music, the same laughter. Yet one soul is nourished and another is quietly drained. Why is this so? We imagine that energy is something we can measure in calories, in watts, in numbers. But the energy of being alive, the energy of consciousness, is not so easily quantified. It is not a battery you carry in your chest. It is more like a river flowing through you. And rivers, you see, do not flow the same way through every valley. For some, the presence of others is like rain falling into their stream. It swells, it rushes, it dances. They feel alive in the company of voices, in the warmth of shared stories. For others, the presence of many voices is like stones dropped into the water. The current is blocked, diverted, slowed. They feel themselves suffocated by the noise, the expectations, the subtle masks that everyone wears. And so the paradox: gatherings that give life to one take life from another. But what is this life we speak of? What is this energy? It is not yours. It is not mine. It is the universe itself breathing through us. And sometimes when you are alone, you feel that breath clearly, like the wind moving through the trees. But when you are surrounded by others, the wind becomes confused, tangled in branches, lost in echoes. Have you noticed how much of a social gathering is performance? We laugh when we are expected to laugh. We nod when we are expected to nod. We tell stories not because they are true, but because they are acceptable. And in this performance, the ego is busy. The ego is like an actor on stage, constantly adjusting its costume, checking the audience, wondering if the lines are convincing. Now, for some, this acting is exhilarating. They love the stage. They love the mask. They feel alive when they are seen. But for others, the mask is heavy. The stage is exhausting. They feel drained because every moment is a negotiation between who they are and who they are supposed to be. Do you see the illusion here? We think that gatherings are about connection, but often they are about conformity. And conformity is the great thief of energy. When you surrender to the flow of life, when you let go of the need to be seen in a certain way, you discover that energy is not lost. It is simply redirected. But when you cling to the mask, when you resist the natural rhythm of your being, you feel drained. Not because the gathering has taken something from you, but because you have spent yourself in resistance. It is like swimming against the current. The river is flowing, but you insist on going upstream. And so you tire, you weaken, you feel exhausted. Yet the river itself has not changed. It is still flowing. It is still carrying you. But you have refused to be carried. So the question is not, why do gatherings drain me? The question is, why do I resist the flow of what is happening? And here lies the paradox. The more you resist, the more you are drained. The more you surrender, the more you are nourished. But surrender is not easy. It feels like death. It feels like losing yourself. And yet in losing yourself, you find that you were never separate to begin with. So perhaps the gatherings are not draining you at all. Perhaps they are showing you the places where you cling, where you resist, where you demand that life be other than it is. And what happens when you stop clinging to the mask? When you let the river carry you. When you let the river carry you, something remarkable happens. You discover that the energy you thought was lost was never yours to begin with. It was always the movement of life itself. And life does not belong to you. You belong to life. Now in a gathering, this truth becomes very clear, because there, surrounded by faces and voices, you are confronted with the illusion of separation. You feel yourself as a distinct self, a fragile ego trying to survive in a sea of others. But is that really what is happening? Think of a forest. Each tree stands alone, yes, but together they form a living system. The roots intertwine beneath the soil. The air is shared, the rain falls on all. No tree is truly separate. And yet imagine one tree insisting, I must grow faster, taller, stronger than the rest. It strains, it resists, it demands. And in that resistance it exhausts itself. So too with us. In gatherings, some feel nourished because they sense the forest. They feel themselves as part of the whole, breathing together, laughing together, flowing together. Others feel drained because they cling to their separateness, their mask, their performance. They resist the forest. And resistance is always exhausting. But here is the paradox. The more you try to protect your energy, the more you lose it. The more you surrender your energy, the more it returns. Have you noticed how children play? They run, they shout, they tumble, they laugh. They do not ask, am I being drained? They do not calculate, how much energy do I have left? They simply play. And in that play they are renewed. But as adults we begin to calculate. We begin to measure. We begin to protect. And in that protection, we lose the very vitality we seek to preserve. So perhaps the gatherings are not draining you. Perhaps it is your calculation that drains you. Your constant measuring, your constant protecting, your constant resisting. Now this does not mean you must force yourself to enjoy every gathering. That too would be resistance. It means you must notice the illusion, notice the mask, notice the calculation, and then let it go. Because when you let go, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that silence exists even in the noise. You discover that solitude exists even in the crowd. You discover that the river flows through you, whether you are alone or surrounded. And then the question changes. It is no longer, why do gatherings drain me? Here it becomes, what happens when I stop resisting the forest of voices? And if you sit with that question quietly, without rushing to answer it, you may begin to feel the truth. The truth that energy is not something you own. It is something you allow. But what happens when the mask you cling to begins to dissolve? When the mask begins to dissolve, you are faced with something both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because the mask has been your identity. Liberating because without the mask you no longer need to pretend. In social gatherings, the mask is often the loudest thing in the room. It smiles when you do not feel joy. It nods when you do not agree. It speaks when silence would be truer. And yet beneath the mask there is a deeper presence. A presence that does not need approval. A presence that does not measure energy in terms of gain or loss. It simply is. Now when you feel drained in a gathering, it is often because the mask has been working overtime. It is exhausting to maintain a performance. It is exhausting to keep the costume in place. But when the mask slips, when you allow yourself to be simply present, something shifts. You begin to notice the gathering in a different way. The voices are no longer demands. The laughter is no longer pressure. The noise becomes a kind of music, and you, instead of resisting, begin to dance with it. Have you ever listened to a symphony? At first it may sound chaotic. Violins, trumpets, drums all at once. But then, if you stop trying to separate the instruments, if you listen to the whole, you hear the harmony. You hear the unity, so too with gatherings. If you listen only to the fragments, this person's words, that person's judgment, your own mask, it feels chaotic, draining. But if you listen to the whole, if you surrender to the forest of voices, you hear the unity, you hear the symphony, and in that symphony you are not drained. You are carried, you are nourished. But here is the paradox. To hear the symphony, you must stop insisting on your own instrument. You must stop clinging to your separateness. You must let go of the mask. Now, this does not mean you must dissolve into the crowd, losing yourself entirely. It means you must recognize that the self you cling to is already an illusion. It is already a mask. And when you let it go, you discover that you were never separate to begin with. So perhaps the gatherings are not draining you. Perhaps they are inviting you to dissolve into the music, into the forest, into the river. And in that dissolution, you find not exhaustion but renewal. But what happens when you realize that the self you thought you were is only a story? The self you thought you were is only a story. A story told by memory, by habit, by the endless chatter of the mind. And stories, you see, are beautiful, but they are not solid. In a gathering, this becomes painfully obvious, because there, surrounded by others, your story collides with theirs. Your narrative of who you are meets their narrative of who they think you are. And the clash of stories can be exhausting. But what if you realize that none of these stories are ultimately true? What if you saw that the self is not a fixed thing, but a flowing process? Like a river, it changes moment by moment. Like a dream, it dissolves the moment you try to hold it. Now, when you cling to your story in a gathering, you feel drained, because you are defending something that does not exist. You are protecting a mask that is already dissolving. And that defense consumes your energy. But when you let the story go, when you allow yourself to be fluid, something miraculous happens. You discover that you are not separate from the gathering at all. You are the laughter, the silence, the music, the pauses. You are the forest of voices. You are the river of presence. And then the gathering no longer drains you. It nourishes you, because you are no longer resisting. You are no longer clinging. You are simply flowing. Have you noticed how exhausting it is to pretend? To pretend to be strong when you feel weak. To pretend to be happy when you feel sorrow. To pretend to be confident when you feel uncertain. Pretending is the great thief of energy. But authenticity, even in silence, is renewal. Because when you are authentic, you are not resisting. You are not clinging. You are simply being. And so the paradox. Gatherings drain you when you pretend, but they nourish you when you surrender. Now, surrender does not mean collapse. It does not mean disappearing. It means allowing yourself to be carried by the river of life, rather than fighting against it. It means recognizing that the self is not a fortress, but a wave. And waves do not resist the ocean. They rise, they fall, they dissolve, they return. So perhaps the gatherings are not draining you. Perhaps they are inviting you to dissolve the story, to let go of the mask, to surrender to the symphony. But what happens when you realize that even the story of being drained is just another illusion? Even the story of being drained is just another illusion. Because what is exhaustion, really? It is not a fixed thing. It is a sensation, a perception, a narrative the mind tells itself. You say, I am tired, but tired compared to what? Compared to yesterday? Compared to your expectation of how you should feel? The truth is, tiredness is as fluid as joy, as fleeting as sorrow. It comes, it goes, it shifts like clouds across the sky. And yet when you cling to the story of being drained, you make it solid. You carve it into stone. You say, this is who I am. I am the one who cannot bear gatherings. And in that carving you exhaust yourself further. But when you see that the story is only a passing cloud, you are free. You are free to let the cloud drift. You are free to let the sensation move. You are free to discover that beneath the story, there is a vast sky, untouched, unexhausted, infinite. Now in gatherings, this truth is hidden by noise. The voices, the laughter, the masks, they all seem to confirm your story. They all seem to say, yes, you are drained. Yes, you are separate. Yes, you are alone in the crowd. But if you pause, if you breathe, if you let the mask dissolve, you may notice something else. You may notice that the crowd is not against you. It is not draining you. It is simply flowing. And you are part of that flow. Have you noticed how a wave does not resist the ocean? It rises, it falls, it dissolves, it returns. It does not say, I am drained. It simply moves, so too with you. You are not drained. You are moving. You are flowing. You are dissolving into the ocean of presence. And in that dissolution you discover renewal. Because the energy you thought was lost was never yours. It was always the movement of life itself. And life cannot be drained. It can only flow. So perhaps the gatherings are not draining you. Perhaps they are teaching you to let go of the story. To let go of the mask. To let go of the illusion of separateness. But what happens when you realize that even exhaustion is just another dance of the universe? Exhaustion, vitality, joy, sorrow. They are all dances of the universe. They rise, they fall, they dissolve, they return. And you, my dear friend, are not separate from this dance. You are the dance itself. So when you say, I am drained, notice the story. Notice the mask. Notice the illusion. and then let it go. Because the truth is, gatherings do not drain you. They reveal you. They show you the places where you cling, where you resist, where you demand that life be other than it is. And in that revelation, there is an invitation to surrender, an invitation to dissolve, an invitation to awaken. Have you noticed how silence exists even in the noise? How solitude exists even in the crowd? How the river flows through you, whether you are alone or surrounded? This is the paradox. You are never drained by life. You are drained only by resistance to life. And when resistance dissolves, energy returns, not as something you own, but as something you are. So perhaps the gatherings are not your enemy. Perhaps they are your teacher. Perhaps they are the mirror in which you see the illusion of separateness, and in that mirror you discover the truth that you are not a mask. You are not a story. You are not a drained self struggling to survive. You are the river. You are the forest. You are the symphony. You are the dance. And when you realize this, gatherings no longer exhaust you. They become opportunities to awaken, opportunities to dissolve, opportunities to remember that you were never separate to begin with. So the next time you feel drained, pause, breathe, notice the mask, notice the story, and then let it go, because in letting go you discover that life has been carrying you all along. And in that discovery there is renewal, there is silence, there is peace, and so the universe breathes through you, whether you notice it or not.